one to shy away from strenuous activity or anything like that. And then, of course, I tried to get on a golf course as much as possible. So when I finally brought it up in January to the intern, the first thing he said to me, he blew it off right away. He immediately said, well, if this was radiation, you should have seen symptoms long before this. This is less than 1 year after the incident occurred. And I'd already been frustrated at that point. So my initial response back to this intern was, I'm not a doctor, but you should go back to med school because you obviously know nothing about radiation. You know, look at history, look at what happened with Chernobyl, look at all the individuals and patients who had developed cancer 20, 30 years after Chernobyl happened. And you're going to sit here and tell me that I should have seen symptoms long before 1 year.
And the timing is going to be dose dependent, of course.
Absolutely, and it's also going to be dependent on the individual's genome. You know, everybody's going to react differently to the radiation exposure. Some people may never see a symptom, and God bless them if they don't. Some people may see symptoms 20 years from now or 30 years from now. Unfortunately, we've already had a sailor from the Reagan who was assigned to one of the squadrons in the air wing who passed away this past April. And he was in his 30s, and he developed a rare form of cancer that is very seldom seen in anybody below the age of 60. And he left behind his young daughter. And, you know, at this point, everybody still fights to get acknowledgement that radiation was the catalyst.
So as it stands right now, you're not really getting any acknowledgement from the VA. They're not going to tie this to your time there. They're treating the symptoms, but they're not going to talk about it being tied in any way to radiation exposure.
At this point, nobody's making the connection. Whether they don't want to, whether they're afraid, whether they're reserved to make that connection because of potential backlash from the beginning. The statement has been the same since the beginning.
Now, we were talking just before the interview, and you said that when you went to one doctor, he made it very clear to you that he was not going to go towards any kind of diagnosis about it being nuclear. Is that correct? And you had other indications that there's an awareness. They certainly know what the situation is, and they just don't want to even talk about it. Is that correct? Or?
There's plenty of awareness out there about this. You know, when I first got to the VA, one of the doctors I had seen, aside from getting past the introduction of who we were, one of the first things that was said to me was, I can't tie this to radiation, so don't bother to ask.
His mind's already made up.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
And
he's gotten a memo or something.
I feel like that's, but you know, I feel that's the case. I feel like there's something circulating, whether a memo, whether it's word
Isn't that
of
interesting
mouth.
that you go to a doctor and he would tell you right off the bat,
Correct.
Okay, I can look at you, but I'm telling you right now, I can't go in this direction. I can't tie it to a particular thing. They've already got a preconceived notion about where they're going to be allowed to go and where they're not going to be allowed to go.
Correct. And you know, one of the other doctors I had seen during the course of the last 3 years and diagnostics and trying to figure out exactly what's been going on, I had brought up, again, the radiation, and I've brought up the fact that there's one condition that just about all of my symptoms fit into, which is chronic radiation syndrome. And the doctor responded with, we don't want to go that way because we want to look for something that we can treat. I understand that. You know, I understand that doctors want to find something that they can treat, but at the same time, everybody else needs closure. Everybody else needs to know what we're dealing with, why we're, you know, why our...
Well, I guess the thing that concerns all of us is so many times we see this, whether it is your particular incident or just the general health effects of Fukushima as it works its, you know, the radiation works its way through the environment. The fact that they want to downplay the health risks of that, the fact that they want to downplay the health risks of vaccines or of fluoride, things that certainly something could be done about it. They continue to put those, and of course, you know, with the radiation, to inform people of what the risks are, let people take their own precautions, and yet they want to pretend that it doesn't exist, and they would rather just treat the symptoms, treat the cancer, rather than addressing the root cause of the cancer, where it could help somebody. That's what we see over and over again.
Correct, and it's rather frustrating. You know, it's frustrating to myself. It's frustrating to everybody else who's now suffering. You know, there are individuals out there who are in very similar situations to myself, where they just start having this progressive muscle weakness that starts in their legs and starts to ascend. There's individuals out there who have developed different forms of cancer, leukemia, children of service members now born with birth defects because of their service over there. And I guess my frustration with it is my situation's different than theirs. And when I say it's different than theirs, I did just about 17 years in the Navy. I had the honor to do that with pride. And I also had the honor to be able to retire, though medically, not the way I wanted to go out the door. I wanted to be able to do 30 plus years in the service. A lot of these other individuals who are suffering, they didn't have that privilege. They didn't have that time to do. They did, some of them 3 years, 4, 5, or 6, and they didn't get the honor and privilege to get a medical retirement. They've gone out the door with nothing, no medical retirement, no benefits, so no health insurance. Some of them trying to fight the system to get recognition that there's something wrong. And all too often, each and every one of us have run into doctors at some point who try to play it off as there's nothing physically wrong with any of us, and that it's all psychological. I went through it. A friend of mine is going through it now. A friend of mine has even been escorted out of a clinic by security because they told him he was faking.
Wow.
And that is not how you treat a patient. That is not, and he is
Was that a VA clinic?
No, that is actually a military facility. In fact, he had one doctor who told him, because his situation is very similar to mine, and he got to the point where he was trying to ambulate using forearm crutches, but it was just taking its toll on him. And so he had a doctor who recommended that it's time for him to move to a wheelchair, and preferably a power chair to save his joints, save his shoulders. And when he went to get fitted for a chair, there was another physician in that clinic who didn't see eye to eye on things. And she made it a point, this doctor made it a point to say, you don't need a chair, you're faking, and you need to leave, and then called security and had him escorted out of there.
Wow.
I don't know what's going on. I don't care who the doctor is.
Yeah.
But at what point can there be something said or done that would make a doctor go against a Hippocratic oath that they took,
Yes.
not to cause further harm to a patient?
Yeah. That's amazing.
And it happens every day.
Wow.
My friend has also had other doctors who have told him that they've made a conscious decision not to align themselves with the doctors who are trying to convince everybody that it's all psychological. So I'm smart enough to read between those lines.
Yeah.
And everybody else is smart enough to read between the lines that says there has been something said at some point by somebody that either A, we need to just make this go away, or B, we need to keep this out of the press, keep this out of the limelight.
Yeah. Well, we see that all the time. We just have these revelations that just came out this week of Gruber, who worked on Obamacare, talking about how they portrayed it as this and portrayed it as that. They didn't want to have any transparency because they wanted to fool the American people. It's gotten to the point where every time we interact as a media organization, or we see people like you interacting with the government, no matter where it is, there's always this idea that they're not going to be honest and forthright, candid with the American people. They've got their private agenda. They've worked it out in a private meeting, and they're going to lie to the public or do whatever they need to forward what they think needs to be done or what they think is in their best interest. I don't really understand why they would not treat sailors who have been affected like this.
And the frustrating piece about it is, at no point has anybody ever come out, myself included, or anybody else that I know that's suffering. We've never come out and said, this is the fault of the U.S. Navy or this is the fault of the U.S. government. We've never done that. Everybody that was there, we were all there for a humanitarian mission. We all knew that. And whether we knew the full severity of what was going on with the reactors melting down. Because I would honestly have to think that if the right information was known at the critical moment where decisions have to be made of where to place the ships who are providing supplies to the shore, if we had accurate information, I think decisions would have been made differently.
So that's why you're suing TEPCO.
That's why everything.
The group is suing. And about how many sailors and Marines are there involved in this lawsuit? Do you have any idea?
The last number I heard was 230, 240, roughly at this point, who have already come forward, who are suffering from illness, whether it's the service member directly or a family member doing it for them, or in the one case of the individual who's since passed, the administrator of his estate is part of the suit.
So now this is about $1 billion lawsuit, is that correct, at the current time? And is this working its way through the American courts? Does that have to go to the Japanese courts?
It is U.S. court. Just recently there was a ruling down in San Diego where it is going to allow the hearing to the court case to continue to proceed forward. Tokyo Electric had made a motion, their attorneys had made a motion to either dismiss the case completely, dismiss with prejudice, meaning we could never bring it up again, or to move it to Japan. And the attorneys who are handling the case, as of right now, they've been doing this. They're the ones that have been biting the bullet. They're the ones who've been doing this out of their pockets at this point. And, you know, they made a good argument. They made it a strong argument to get the judge to understand that if she dismisses the case with prejudice as TEPCO wanted and their attorneys wanted, our voice is gone. Because at that point, we would have to go through appellate courts and everything else to try to continue to move this forward. And they also, the attorneys that were handling the case as well, they also made a motion to add additional defendants, such as GE, who was the original designer of the plant, who knew that there was faulty equipment going into the plant when constructed, which...
And along those lines, the former head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said after Fukushima, he said, we ought to shut down every single nuclear reactor in the United States because they have that same inherent design flaw that could possibly cause this to happen. So it is something that they have, is a massive cover-up of both the reactor design as well as what was going on there, as well as the aftermath, because we've seen people, notably the man who was in charge of the cleanup, has died, and of course they said had nothing to do with that. You know, I think it was a cancer that he died from.
And there's also been a report that surfaced, I don't remember how long ago, there was a report that surfaced talking about the increase of thyroid cancers within young children in and around the Fukushima area. So there's obviously a problem. There's obviously...
Well, we're nearly out of time, but just before we leave, I was just curious when you mentioned the thyroid cancer. Did they do anything on board ship to ameliorate the exposure to that you might suffer from water and other things, other than just battening down the hatches when that you were in the radiation plume? The
only thing that really happened for those who, the air crew who were flying ashore, taking the supplies from the ship to the shore, they were given KI tablets. But as far as...
Potassium iodide. Yeah.
Correct. But as far as the rest of the crew getting issued that, they didn't give it out to the rest of the crew.
Nothing at all. Wow. Well, I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. And I mean, this is just at the beginning stages of the lawsuit, I'm imagining. It can go on for quite some time.
And it has been going on for quite some time. In fact, it was the end of 2012 when I first heard that there was anybody else sick. Up until that point, the first year before that, from the end of 11 till December of 12, I honestly thought I was the only one. And I was trying to figure out exactly what caused it. And once I found out that there were others involved and there were others sick and suffering, that's when things really started to make sense. Because up until that point, you know, with the things that the doctors would tell me and the things that they weren't telling me, you do get to the point, you know, at some time where you're kind of questioning, well, was that the catalyst that triggered everything? You know, what else could it have been? And to know, as unfortunate as it is, that there are others suffering